Hi, welcome to Board Gems. This is my regular video series with new videos on the 3rd, 13th, and 23rd of every month in which I cover an older board game gem. Usually it's not one that's really talked about much anymore. I like to cover kind of the more older and forgotten gems, and this one is not as forgotten. It gets regular reprints. It first came out in 1998, 1999, something like that. But it's been reprinted numerous times since then, and the most recent printing was just a couple of years ago. And that's this one. I hope I'm pointing at this right. So Chinatown. Now, the first edition of Chinatown came out late 90s, like 99, something like that, published by Alea. Now, Alea, of course, had a very well sought-after series of board games, their big box series. They have a new big box series now that they're starting. But Chinatown was number 2. And actually an interesting story about that. Now, keep in mind, I get my stories from all over the place, very often from podcasts that I listened to 10 years ago. So always consider that everything I say may be apocryphal, or at least wildly inaccurate. So Jay Tummelson of Rio Grande Games published the English edition of the very first game in the Alea Big Box series. That was Raw. And it's been printed by a number of companies since then. But number 2, Chinatown, never had an English edition. And from my memory, he said that he simply was not offered it. He worked with Alea to release an English version of Raw. And then, to his surprise, they just went ahead and did number 2, Chinatown, without him. And when he asked why, they said, you wouldn't be interested in that game. Don't even worry about it, mate. I'm paraphrasing. They were German, not Australian. For a long time, anyway, Chinatown did not have an English edition. I think the first English edition came out from Philosophia. So this edition I have here it's the Philosophia edition. You can see Philosophia's logo on the corner there. This is actually the German edition from Heidelberger. The reason I have this is because I did an order many, many years ago from a German retailer. And this was on sale. And it was something ridiculously cheap. Like €8 or something. They were practically giving this away. Ridiculous, considering that often when this game is in between printings, its value goes up. Like, people want this game, and it can be hard to find sometimes. But anyway, this edition came out in 2008, and now, okay, this is a weird thing I do. I don't recommend you do this. So, oh hey, that was probably important. So you got a board and everything, and oh, look, what do you know? A second edition of Chinatown. So this is a smaller box edition. This is about the same size as a Pandemic, the Z-Man, kind of one of Z-Man's standard size boxes. And this one, I think, came out in 2014, and then maybe around 2018, 2019, they had reprinted this. So you can find this now, this edition. And I'll talk about the differences in editions later. But you're probably wondering, why do I have a Chinatown inside a Chinatown? Well, the reason is because this game is 3 to 5 players, but you can technically play 6 if you have extra tokens. You want a big version if you're playing with a large group of people, 5 or 6 people. The smaller one takes up a lot less space, but the board is also smaller. But anyway, I couldn't decide which version I wanted to keep. The smaller version is good on the shelf, it doesn't take up as much space, but this one's better, like it's a bigger board, and it's nice if you want to play with a lot of people. So I couldn't decide which to keep, so I tossed the cardboard insert and put the new one in the old one. I ended up keeping both. The designer is Karsten Hartwig. It's for 3 to 5 players. If you have extra tokens, you can play with 6. There is a variant on BGG, which I have not tried personally. I would love to. But people's feedback works pretty well. So 3 to 5 out of the box anyway. You're going to hear people on Board Game Geek who say 5 players is the way to go. 4 is best in my opinion. It's a pure negotiation game. And in a pure negotiation game, it can sometimes be good to play with an even number of players. That way everybody kind of stays involved. I've played this game a lot, 3-player for example, and it's very common for 2 people to try to work out a deal, and then that 3rd player is just kind of sitting around waiting. Or if you're my son, if the 3rd player is my son, trying to sabotage the deal. It's like, oh, that's a terrible deal. You wouldn't want to make that. It's for ages 10 and up, which I think is pretty fair. And this box says it takes about an hour. Again, that's pretty fair. But it's really open-ended in terms of how long the game takes, because it is a pure negotiation game, and there's a phase in the game in which just say go, and then everybody starts trading. And when does that phase stop? When everybody's done. So based on how many deals you try to make, how active the players are in their attempted deal making, the game can be short or the game can be long. The box says 60 minutes. I would probably set aside at least 90 minutes for the game in case people want to get into it, right? Don't say, well, we've got an hour left, let's bang out a game of Chinatown. Don't do that. But fortunately, the game does not take very long to teach. It is actually a very simple game. Also not very long to set up. Why don't I show you how it plays, then I'll talk more about why it's a gem, still a gem today. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players, sort out the money. It's in denominations of $10, $50, $100, and $200,000. Give each player 5 tens for a starting capital of $50,000. Give each player also 1 player aid, it's double-sided, as well as all the starting tokens. Pick a start player. The start player starts with this card, and this will pass clockwise every round. And place the round marker on this dial here. There's numbers 1 through 6, showing the years 1965 to 1970. So you're going to place it on the 1, 1965, year of the snake. And you're ready to begin. I mean, not with these tokens on the board. Crap. The goal of the game is to make the most money. You make money from businesses that are on the board. Businesses are tiles that are in this drawstring bag. Every business on the board has a type, in this case it's a laundromat, and a number 5. And that's how many tiles adjacent, all owned by the same player, it takes for the business to be complete. Businesses can't be any larger than that. The larger a business is, the more money it makes, up to its complete size. Every business tile on the board will be owned by a player. This is a business of size 1. And on the player aid, on one side of the player aid, not sure how well this shows up here, it will show how much money a business makes based on its size and whether it's complete or incomplete. Some businesses are sized 5. That means if the same player owns 5 businesses, all of the same type, all adjacent to each other, not including diagonal, then that will be considered complete, and it'll make $110,000 at the end of each round. But if it was only size 4, it would be incomplete and would only make 60. But businesses are all sorts of different sizes, as you can see here. So a tea house of size 1 will earn its owner $10,000, of size 2, $20,000, and size 3, because it's complete, will make its owner $50,000, whereas a laundromat of size 3 would only be making $40,000 because it's not to its maximum size. So a business like this, all owned by the same player, earns its owner $40,000 because it's an incomplete laundromat of size 3, $40,000. If one of these tiles was owned by a different player, this is considered one business and will earn its owner $20,000. This is considered a separate business and will earn its owner $10,000. The number on the tile also shows how many tiles are in the bag, but there's 3 extra of every type. So there can only ever be 1 complete laundromat because there are only 8 laundromat tiles in the game, whereas there's 6 tea houses, so there could be 2 complete tea houses by the end. All these business tiles go in the bag. There's also a deck of cards, which is shuffled at the beginning of every round, and there's one card for every lot, for every business space on the board. At the beginning of every round, you're going to shuffle up the building cards. After you shuffle up the deck, give each player a number of cards based on how many players are playing and what round it is. The first round, we usually get more cards. So let's say a 4-player game. In round 1, you would deal out 6 cards to every player. The players look at those. Often they're trying to find places that are adjacent to each other, like, a 4 and a 5 would be nice, a 22, 23. And they will look at these and they will keep all but 2 of them. 2 cards from each player will be discarded face down, and then every player reveals their cards. They can hang on to them because it proves ownership, and then players will place their ownership markers on those lots. Like so. Then all the players draw business tiles. And again, the player age shows how many business tiles to draw. Note that you never discard any business tiles. You draw the number that you need. And ideally, you would keep these face down until everybody has drawn. The reason is because, especially when you're playing with more players, like 4 or 5 players, once 2 people have business tiles, they may already think about starting to make deals, and that's not fair to the players later in turn order who still have to draw tiles. They can't jump into those deals. So ideally, players will keep all their business tiles face down. And then after everyone has drawn, then they would reveal. Then it's deal making. In this phase, pretty much anything goes. You can make all sorts of trades, obviously within game terms. You can't make deals outside the game, like, hey, if you make this trade, I'll give you a crisp new $100 bill. It's all about the Bordens, baby. But besides that, be creative. You can obviously sell anything for money. You can sell business tiles. You can sell the spaces on the board to each other. All the players can talk to each other and offer all sorts of deals, but anything in a player's possession can be traded, including money, including business tiles. But once a business tile is on the board, it never gets removed or moved. That florist is going to be there for the rest of the game. The only thing that might change is its owner. So there's no end point to this phase of the game. Players talk it out until they feel like there aren't any more deals that can be made. And then at some point, usually I would say the start player, the player with this card, after kind of things have petered down a bit, then the start player can probably call out and say, okay, let's stop that phase. And then, starting with the start player, players can, if they want to, they don't have to, but they can take any of their business tiles that they have owned, like face up in front of them, and place them on the board on empty spaces that they own. So I may try to start a factory here, for example. Maybe during that round I try to get more factories. I don't have a third factory, so I'm going to leave this empty instead of putting something else in here, because maybe I can get more factory spaces for my business. So after a player has placed their business tiles on the board, then the next player in clockwise order does so until all players have had a chance to put businesses in the spaces they own. And then all players earn money for their businesses, as I described earlier. Every business on the board, and remember this is considered to be one business because it's the same type and owned by the same owner and adjacent, every business will earn income based on its size and whether it's complete and incomplete. This is of course a 2-size business, and it's incomplete. It would be complete if it was size 6 and would then earn a whopping $140,000. The size 2, incomplete, only earns 20. But all players earn income for all their businesses. Then is a new round. Pass the start player marker card, move this marker to the next space, take all the business cards that were discarded, put them back on the deck and reshuffle, and deal out a new number of cards to each player, again based on the round number and number of players. And you do that 6 times. At the end of the 6th round, you earn income like all the other rounds, and then at the end, the player with the largest holdings of money wins the game. That's it. You're ready to play Chinatown. This is a really wide open trading and negotiation game. And in a lot of ways, it's the most pure example of such a game that I've played personally. I think a lot of people would probably prefer more of a game in which trading is an aspect. And this just gets rid of everything else. Just like it's all the trading. Does make the game really, really easy to learn, really easy to set up, and you can just get into it. One thing I find that's a little bit hard to wrap your brain around, and this may be just me, so I'm giving you a heads up, if you play Chinatown, don't be like me. I had a hard time seeing the possibility of really creative trades that you can do. In this game, pretty much anything goes. I mean, don't trade for things that are like outside the game, right? You know, hey, I'll let you borrow my your favorite game that I own. I'll let you borrow it for a week if you make this trade. You know, don't do stuff like that. But, you know, be creative within the game. There's no real rules about the trading. You can trade pretty much anything. I was reading a blog post from somebody who had got together with their friends for the first time in a long time due to COVID. And one of the games they played at their game session was Chinatown. They played a big game of 5 or maybe even 6 players, which is possible with a variant. You just need extra tokens. And I was looking at a photo that was taken, and some of the businesses, the business tiles, had 2 tokens on them for 2 different players. And I'm looking at this, and I had to post in the blog post, to comment and say, you know, is this a variant or something? Like, what's the deal with that? And someone replied, it's like, no, that's, you know, anything goes. So they decided to work together to basically have adjacent businesses, and they decided to share them and to split the profits. So it becomes one business owned by both players. Nothing in the rules says you can do that, but nothing in the rules says you can't. It's really open-ended. But anyway, when I saw that reply, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I've been playing this game wrong. Not wrong. I've been missing out on a whole other level of Chinatown. I was not that creative to think that I could make deals like that. Opening that up to all these kind of new and interesting types of trades, I'm looking forward to my next play. I'm really looking forward. I'm looking forward to playing it with 6 too. I think it'll be pretty great with 6. This game, I think, would benefit from having an even number of players, just so nobody feels left out. There'll always be somebody else. You can make big trades. Like, you can make like 3-player, 4-player trades. But if you're the one player who's left out, it's not that fun for you, right? So the more players you have, the more people you have an opportunity to make deals with. And the deals become a little bit more... The deals are smaller, and which is what you want, right? I'll just trade this for that. Okay, great, right? And you don't have to think about it too hard. Maybe they're benefiting from the trade slightly more than you are, but you are still benefiting based on all the other players. There has been research done about trading situations, right? I don't know if they were board games, but they might have been like specially structured trading games for the purpose of the research. The player who did the best was not the player who made the best trades. It was the player who made the most trades. Because presumably every trade is beneficial to you, otherwise you wouldn't do the trade. You don't want to make trades in which you're taking advantage of the other player, and of course if they're a good player, they're going to see you're taking advantage of that, and you're not going to be able to come to a deal. You make deals, and you know what, maybe the other player benefits a little bit more than you, but as long as there's lots of other players as well, your position improves relative to them, still worthwhile. So in that sense, more players are good. I still play it a lot 3-player. My family and I like it 3-player. It does mean the deals are by default bigger because there's fewer people to deal with, right? You need 5 different things, and in a 5-player game, maybe every other player has something you need. But in a 3-player game, each player has maybe 2 things you need, and you need to work with each person to make like a bigger deal. And then it can be a little bit more plotting, right? Because it's more important to make a deal that's fair when you're playing with fewer players. I usually like to play more by the seat of my pants. I know this deal is good for me. I know it's good for them. I haven't mathed it out, but it's a good deal for both of us. I'm going to do it, right? And that's a less successful strategy with fewer players than with more. And it is possible to math things out. I could see people having a problem with this part of the game. The payouts for the businesses are based on a formula, and you have a little player aid, and you can see exactly what the calculations are. It does mean that you can actually tell how much something is worth to some other player. So you can say, if he gets this business tile, okay, he's going to be able to complete a business of 3. That's going to be making him, let's say, $50,000, and there's 3 more rounds, so this will make him $150,000 over the rest of the game. Versus if he only had the 2 businesses, then he's only making $20,000 over 3 rounds. But of course, you have to factor in it's not perfectly solvable, because maybe this player will be able to work with another player to get the tile they need, or maybe they'll get it themselves on a later turn so you can't extort them usually. You still want to make beneficial trades. You can't math it out exactly often, except for the final round. And in the final round, all the random stuff that could have happened has already happened. And that last round, often you don't see very many trades happen. Because one thing, too, about the game, it's a tiny little complaint I have, but I can see the good side of it, too. So you have these business tiles, right? And one business tile, just by itself, will give you $10,000 when it's on the board every round. If you have 2 separately, they're each worth $10,000. So, okay, that's $20,000. Let's suppose they're the same type. Still $20,000. Let's say they're the same type and next to each other. Still $20,000. It's only when you get to size 3 that there's a jump. And what that means is that usually by the 6th round, it's not worthwhile to just trade the dregs that people have left over. Because, I could put this on the board and I would make $10,000, or I can trade it to you. Well, how much do I sell it for? Like, I could just sell it to you for money, but the smallest denomination in this game is $10,000. You can't sell it for less than $10,000. That's the smallest bill. I could make $10,000 just putting it on the board myself. It would have been nice to make those small trades more worthwhile, but it would slow the game down more. In this game, there's kind of a set minimum trade size or trade value. And the game has components which are worth less than that, but it's not worthwhile to trade for just those. So you kind of have to do minimum size trades to make it worthwhile to everybody. And that does actually speed the game up a little bit. So people aren't really being super careful about the tiniest little details, right? It can kind of be more broad strokes, work on the bigger deals, but not too big deals, of course. I've seen people, I've played in a 5-player game in which one player tried to make a 5-way trade. And I think I was the only person, I might have been the only person who played it before. I'm not sure. But I remember saying, it's like, this is not going to work. It's like, you can try. I'm having fun. I don't care. I'll just sit here, right? You can try. And he tried. And it probably took him 10 or 15 minutes. And I don't think in the end he was able to make it work, right? It's usually, I would say, try to max out maybe maximum 3 players involved in a trade. I do know that some people play this game and they're just kind of like, okay, go. And then everybody just kind of shouts, okay, I got this, you got that, right? And I've actually never played it that way. Maybe it's just the type of people I play with. I have played it with several different groups, not a huge number of groups, but a number of different people. And in pretty much every game I played, it's been a more laid-back affair than I've heard some people playing it as. You're looking at everybody's holdings, right? And you're saying, okay, you have a tea house. I need a tea house. So what do I have that you want, right? And ideally, like I said, in kind of like a 4-player game, it's an even number. So I'm making a trade with this guy, you're making a trade with her, and nobody is kind of out, right? Although you can have like a 3-way trade, and if it's a 4-player game, one person's left out. I don't know. I can understand why people might think it's best with 5. It is going to be possibly longer with 5. But the bigger factor is how much they get into the trading aspect, right? I've played games of Catan that were almost 3 hours long. I'm not talking about even with expansions. I'm talking about base Catan, because the people I was playing with really got into the trading. You're probably going to get some people who say, oh no, it's not worth playing with 3. I'm not one of them. I'll play it with any number. I have not played it with 6, and I'd love to. But of 3, 4, and 5, 4 is my favorite. Just my opinion. I can talk a little bit about the different editions. There's basically 3 different editions. There's the original Alea, big box. Then there's this really big box. Then there's a smaller version of this. So unless you collect Alea big box games, like the old series, there's a new series now that they rebooted, but I'm talking about the original big box series. If you collect those games, hey, good luck. There are some hard to find games out there, and there's a lot of people who own them, and they're not trading. They like to have their complete set, thank you very much. But otherwise, you don't have to go crazy to seek out an old copy. So the old copy has cardboard tiles. Well, they all have cardboard tiles for the businesses. The newer ones are much more colorful. The other ones were kind of solid color. They looked almost like a newsprint style, which is kind of nice and in its own way. But like, for example, all the 3s are green, and they're just slightly different shades of green. The shades are a little bit different. Maybe it's okay in person, but the newer editions are much more bright and colorful, and the tiles are differentiated much more. So I appreciate that. And the ownership markers, the markers you put on the tiles to indicate that you own this business, in the original LA edition are cardboard tokens, or just tiny little cardboard tokens, probably with a little Chinese character on them. But this edition here, this giant box here, nice big board. Like I said, the cardboard tiles for the businesses are really bright and colorful, and they stand out compared to each other quite well. And instead of cardboard ownership markers, they're wooden discs. So that's nicer. In the newer edition, which I think started around 2014, so this but in a smaller box. So the board is smaller. And the tokens, instead of being wood, they're plastic. And they're slightly different colors. I don't really have a preference between the two. I mean, I guess the bigger one is better, but is it worth being in this giant box? I'd probably argue no. Unless you think you might play it a lot with 5 or even 6 players. I'm pretty strongly opinionated about something. A game that plays a lot of people should be big. Should have a big board, big pieces. Because you'll have 6 people sitting around the table. Not everybody is going to be as close to the board as other people. Some people might be they'd have to sit a little bit farther away. And if they're sitting a bit farther away, they need to see still what's going on. And playing on a big board with big pieces is much more pleasant that way. My video on Show Manager, I compared the 3 different Queen editions of Show Manager / Atlantic Star. And I have a strong preference for the newest edition because it's a big board. And because that game can play up to 6 players, having a big board with big pieces is very welcome. In the newest edition, it's a smaller board, and it's still fine. So it's probably about the same size board as Pandemic. And for a while, I was just going to keep that for myself, because most of the time I play this game 3 players. Small board like that is completely fine. But when I realized that I could play this with 6 if I had extra tokens, then I was like, I'm not sure I want to give up the bigger giant edition. Maybe I want to keep that big one, because the bigger board is just so much more pleasant when you're playing with a large group of people. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If shelf space is not a premium, I guess if you can find this edition is probably the way to go. But the new edition is completely fine. There's no practical difference really, except for the size. The only complaint I really have, and it's the same complaint with both those new editions, is the money are cards, which is great. More games should do this. I know a lot of people complain about paper money. Paper money never really bothered me a lot, but poker chips are nicer. But money as cards, I think, is great. And they come in 4 denominations. They do look slightly different in the way that American money looks slightly different, right? But they're all kind of green. They maybe have different presidents on the faces, but at a glance, they look pretty similar. So it would have been nice, since they're cards anyway, and you're able to hide how much money you have, because the backs are all the same, right? They could have differentiated the fronts a little bit more. But anyway, the original version, the Alea version, came with a deck of cards. They're basically event cards, and every round you would flip one over, and it may or may not. I think some of the event cards said don't do anything, basically. But some of the event cards would add an extra payout for people who had certain sizes or types of businesses on the board, which is a neat idea, because you can get businesses and then just hang on to them. You're not making money from them, but you're kind of waiting to see if you can get enough business lots to put the business down. And those cards can kind of encourage you to get your businesses out first, because you might get an extra payout for them. So that's kind of neat. I can understand why some people may like it. It's completely not necessary, and these editions don't come with it. Don't feel like you're missing out. I know there are a lot of Chinatown purists who would probably never play with those. And I have never played with those because I never had the original edition, and I never felt I was missing out. There's also a variant. It's an official variant, I believe. I think it was actually in the rule book for the original Alea. You see, based on the art on the board, some businesses are, they're basically grouped in blocks, right? So there's groups of businesses, business lots. And some of them on the art show them being next to streets. And sometimes, artistically, they're surrounded by, like maybe other buildings that are not in play, but there's art there, right? There's a variant that says that every business needs street access. So some of those sized lots, unless they're on the edge, they're worth less. So you can't have a business, and you can't make money from your business unless at least one of the business lots has street access. I think that's a really, really neat idea. So in the normal game, right, you have a hand of cards, and you're deciding which ones to keep, but maybe only some of them are actually useful to you, and the other ones are more speculative. You don't know whether they're useful to, for you in the future, maybe useful for somebody else based on the cards they're keeping. The ones in the middle are more useful to keep because they're adjacent to more other lots, right? So it's more possible you can make deals to kind of put them together. You don't want ones kind of on the edge or in the corner because they're adjacent to fewer business lots, and you can probably make fewer deals with them. This kind of helps reverse that preference. And now it's like, oh, you want ones on the edge. Those are now more valuable, right? Compared to ones on the inside, which they're adjacent to a lot of stuff, but they're also, they're not very good in and of themselves. I haven't tried it. I'd love to try it sometime. But keep in mind that the new edition's art is different. And they still have business lots. Some are next to streets and some are not next to streets, but it's not the same layout as the original Alea. And I don't know if the new board was looked at by the designer as, okay, now, this, we'll do this layout, and now this layout would also work with this variant. No, I don't know that that's the case. It's possible it's just artistically they, change the block sizes, but it's possible now that that variant is not going to work as well. I have not tried it. I just wanted you to be aware of that. Caveat game over. Besides the money, which is a slight complaint, but it is something. The only real complaint I have is the dude on the cover. Not a fan. Is it racist? I'm not the best judge of that. It kind of gives me that weird racist-ish feeling. I try not to judge people like artists, for example, from different countries and cultures, and the people in those cultures are the best people to kind of criticize. I will say that the artist for this edition is French, and France has a long, rich history of parodic illustrations, caricatures. It's a very French style of art, right? Exaggerating certain features. And when you exaggerate certain features of people of particular races, you're definitely kind of starting to veer into that direction of racial stereotypes, right? Again, I don't feel super comfortable judging. I think a Chinese person in France and who's grown up in France might have a better opinion as to whether that would be considered a racist caricature in France. I have a problem with the way he's dressed. All right, that's a very traditional. I think it's called a tong zhuang. This style of clothes, which this game is supposed to take place in the 1960s, 1965 to 1970, something like that, according to the round marker, and that was pretty anachronistic back then. Like, that's a young man. A young man probably wouldn't be wearing that in 1960s America, Chinatown. And so I kind of have a feeling like they wanted to put a dude on the cover, because you have a face on the cover that's more appealing, more attractive to buyers, is to have a person like front and center facing you, right? But then there's the push to like, well, the game is called Chinatown, so we want to make him look more Chinese, right? So let's give him kind of a traditional Chinese outfit, and it just doesn't fit, I think, with 1960s America's, like, Chinatown in America. You know what? I'm probably talking out of my ass. I don't know. That was before my time. But, like, that art would be completely fine just without the dude. Just take the dude out. Like, the background, it's like there's a young Chinese couple who are just moving into Chinatown. Like, I think that's fine, right? But they needed somebody front and center with a face. They thought that would, sell better, make it more personable, I suppose. Whenever they do a new version of this, just take the dude out, honestly. But there's going to be hobbyists who are going to be like, no, they should set it in space. Oh, God. I like the Chinatown setting, and I hope they keep it for future editions. And, not everything has to be set in space or fairy tale fantasy world, all right? Let's keep Chinatown in the real world, all right? Let's do that. Would I recommend Chinatown? Yeah. And I don't even have to recommend it. Like, I know that there's lots of people out there already looking for this game, because every time they print it, it sells out relatively fast. And then they sit on it for a little while, right? You have to constantly reprint it, right? Print a few thousand copies, let them sell out, then sit back, check demand, see if people are still wanting it. With a lot of copies out in the marketplace and in players' collections, you don't want to flood the market with them, right? Because maybe some people don't like it and they want to trade it away. So the people who do want the game are able to get it without buying it. So they wait a while and see, and sure enough, people are like, oh, where can I get this? When's the reprint? And every few years, right, they print it, it gets sold out, and then people start asking, when are they going to reprint it, right? And that cycle's happened twice now. and now we're in the third modern printing, I suppose you will. That one just came out, I think, around 2019. So, look, if you're interested in the game, just buy it. All right, or get it in trade, whatever. But, don't wait. People wait, and it's like, oh, I don't know, I haven't decided yet, let me think about it. And then it sells out, and then people are like, oh my god, where can I get it? Like, yeah, they'll reprint it, and they reprinted it, and now it's available in stores. Go buy it. Whether it's for you, I mean, obviously you're the final judge of that, right? I can say that Chinatown is not like other games. There are lots of games and popular games that have negotiation elements, right? You have Catan, you have Bonanza, you have Monopoly, right? Like trading is a pretty common thing in board games, and Chinatown is not derivative. Some people would probably like to add more game, and instead the designer took away elements, right? It's just the trading. And it's one of those games, has a really simple rule set, easy to set up, easy to learn. You can just get started. And then it's all the interactions, all the talking that people are doing, right? Maybe not best for shy people. You can also play in teams. That's a possibility too, right? So it will slow the game down a bit, but you could play even something like, I'm just spitballing, like I haven't actually tried this, but like you could play like an 8-player game and just do teams, right? Like 4 teams. You can do stuff like that, right? And Chinatown as a game design is really, really flexible. It's whatever game you want it to be. And it definitely fills a niche in your collection as the purest example of a negotiation game. There's only a few games that I feel are like really, really like pure negotiation. I think another one is Quo Vadis, which I have to play more. I've played it a few times, but I haven't played it recently. I need to play that again. But this is a great game, and this is a game that is never leaving my collection. And it's probably a game you should consider for your collection too. Thanks for watching. Remember, older gems like Chinatown don't stop being gems just because newer games come out. 再见.